Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning into our Leaving Your Legacy Building an Exit Strategy on Point webinar. My name's Keara Bradley. I'm Vice President of Strategic Market Sales here at Oak Street Funding. I am so excited to be joined by Dennis Leininger, founder and principal consultant at Business Transition Solutions. Dennis has been friend and partner to Oak Street for years now. He has 35 years of experience in setting up businesses, evaluating and assimilating acquisitions and mergers, running offices, and consulting with business owners on best practices for small business operations. He's successfully sold businesses in the past and fully understands the complicated nature of structuring sales agreements to meet the goals of the seller. Dennis holds a CEPA designation, or Certified Exit Planning Advisor, and an ASBC designation, or Accredited Small Business Consultant, which, along with his years of business experience, positions BTS to guide clients on their business operations. Today, Dennis and I are digging into succession. We'll discuss the succession process, tips on overcoming obstacles, what to look for in a successor, and more. Dennis, thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Keara. My pleasure.
Absolutely. So before we dive right into succession, can you first tell the audience the difference between a succession plan and a continuity plan?
No, I'm glad you asked that because it's something that we get asked all the time. Continuity is for triggering events like death and disability. And so that's something you need to have in place in case of a catastrophic event that happens. Succession planning is more of a planned event, more of a planned departure that revolves around retirement and how you're going to exit the business, how the next generation or your successor is going to move forward successfully with your practice.
Thanks so much for explaining that distinction. We're focusing mainly on succession today. So to start there, would you mind beginning with creating your exit strategy? How to do that? What are the necessary elements?
So the way that you really begin the succession plan is by focusing on the continuity plan, because the continuity plan will expose those elements that you need to learn, like the value of your company, who's going to be your successor, and start the process then so you can begin thinking about how you're going to plan your succession. That's a totally different type of an exit. And then there's some other things that we'll get to throughout our conversation here today that'll layer into that.
Absolutely. And, over the years, we've learned that timing with these types of plans is absolutely key. So in your opinion, when should business owners who are thinking about transition or succession begin creating their exit strategy?
Yeah, I really think that they should start at least 10 years out to be thinking about the value of their practice, to learn what they don't know. And one of those things is what drives the value of their practice, makes it valuable to somebody else that would be wanting to come in. So if the person who's going to buy your practice is a junior partner, for instance, it's about preparing them to be able to work with the clients and to afford the practice. And that could take many years to go ahead and accomplish that. So that's one thing that I would go ahead and work on. But then what happens is that you're looking to retire. And believe me, I know, because I've retired twice and I keep coming back. The reason that it takes a while to be in the process of thinking, because it evolves. You're constantly changing your idea of how you want to sell and who you want to sell to possibly as well. But if you can work during that time, say starting in 10 years, and as you get closer, if you understand some of the things like, how do I build value in my practice? How do I prepare the successor to take over for me? What's my retirement going to look like? Usually as you get about 3 to 2 years out, it becomes very crystallized.
Absolutely. And with the owner or the Gen 1 starting so many years in advance, thinking through what plan makes the most sense for their firm, what type of succession options would you say are available to the Gen 1?
Yeah, so the options that exist are really, again, whatever it is that you want to accomplish. But let's just take a couple of those. You can work with your successor to pay you all up front and exit with the money and just pretty much be done. Usually there's a transition period where the seller is working with the buyer to build those relationships of the clients to the buyer. So that 1 year is typically involved in there too. You can also have a situation where you can carry a promissory note as a seller for the buyer, and then the buyer is going to finance through the seller. That doesn't happen very often anymore because the seller chooses to get their money and exit, not have the risk of that involved. Or it can be a hybrid of the two things, and that actually does happen quite a bit, where a small percentage is carried by the seller, and then they get outside financing, like with Oak Street.
Thanks so much for explaining those options. So now we've covered timelines and we've covered options. So say you're an advisor and you're starting on your succession plan, which I know you said you've retired twice and come back. What qualities should somebody be looking for in a successor?
Yeah, this is really critical. You want somebody who's going to respect you to the clients that you've worked with all these years. That's a really critical point. People think immediately it's about the money, and honestly, the money needs to be there, but that's not the primary driver. It's about the relationship and the trust that you build with the buyer as your successor. So that's the number one thing, is to focus on that. They're making sure that they can service your model of what you do. So if you're discretionary, you need somebody who works in that world and understands that. Somebody who is physically close enough to get to your location, if you have a preponderance of your clients in that location, is important. Or maybe a larger practice that can supply another advisor to actually be in your current office and get to know the clients and be there to service them. So those are just some of the things. Somebody that you can collaborate with during the transition period who thinks similarly to you, and maybe a firm that has a very similar client service model.
All great things to look for. Now, with all of your experience with these types of businesses and with these types of transactions, what would you say is a common myth that business owners believe about succession?
That it's all about the money. And it really, I've probably done somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 practice sales, and I can tell you that I don't think any of them started off with, what can I get the money I want to ask for? They all want to feel comfortable with the person that they want to work with. This thing that some of the providers put out there, that do valuations and documents and things like that, you've heard it before, that they'll say that there are 50 buyers for every seller. And the fact is that there might be 50 practices interested, but when the seller looks at them, there's only one or two that they would consider.
Right.
And so really not putting it up for an auction, in my viewpoint, but really trying to meet the right individual that can come into your practice is a better, and it actually ends up being a quicker type of a transaction.
Mm-hmm. And aside from just finding the right fit, because there's so many factors involved there, what are some other obstacles in the process that often catch people off guard?
Well, the biggest one is emotions. Um, you take my circumstance, for instance, of retiring twice. I obviously am not good at that. You can only watch so many reruns of Seinfeld. So the issues that you run into are, gosh, you put your blood, sweat, and tears into building this. You have personal relationships with these clients. Some of them are good friends. Some of them you even golf with, quite a bit. And so these are hard people to leave. It's hard to hang up your spurs and say that, what I've done my whole career, I am now done doing. There's a little bit of a prestige element in it too. Being the top person where people come to you for advice and now suddenly they don't. So that part of it, the emotions on the seller side, the buyer has emotions too. Same event, different perspectives entirely. And so from the buyer's standpoint, they're excited. They want to get going. They want those relationships with the clients yesterday, but it takes time to build those relationships. And of course, they're very concerned about the expenditure. If you're going to be laying out a couple million, 5 million, or even 1 million for a practice, you're very concerned about what if they're the things that you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. What if the clients leave? What am I going to do? Now, that very seldom happens, but of course, that's the fear factor you have of this kind of a transaction. So, because it's all relationship oriented. So, working through all the emotions, not when they pop up, but really at the very beginning, so that you can prepare people for it, you can gauge for it. That's really critical. And for buyers and sellers, I think it's just equally critical that they spend a little bit of brain time thinking, projecting, imaging about what this is going to be like and what their transition is going to be like.
So now that we've talked about strategy and tips, would you walk us through what you would say in a perfect world is the ideal exit strategy?
Yeah, that's the hardest question you've asked. Uh, so I would say that first of all, just philosophically, it's about making sure that the seller feels comfortable with the whole process and has had some closure, fair monetization of their practice, feels like they did right by their clients, by their employees, that they're involved in it and in the family, and that they have a pretty clear picture of what it is that they're going to do in their next step, their next chapter. And for the buyer, it's about being well positioned. Structurally, how that could look is, let's say that let's say it's an internal sale first, so that the seller is selling to somebody who works right there in their office. Those are more prevalent. There are more teams than I've seen in a long time. And so you're selling to a team member. It's about building familiarity with the clients and then working out the deal so that it is comfortable for both parties. The buyer can go out and borrow and take some of that load off of the seller. That's a huge thing. And again, where Oak Street steps into it so many times to facilitate that. And then the seller works for a period of time in transition, maybe a year, to help ease those new relationships, for the clients to feel comfortable, for the new FA to be comfortable. Those are really critical things. And just so I can get this out there for the people listening, it's not a full year of the same work. It's usually like about 4 months of messaging and introductions and being with the new advisor and the client and making them feel comfortable. The next 3 to 4 months is the second round of maybe some clients need a little bit more hand holding, that type of thing. And then really the end of the year, the last 3 to 4 months is you're kind of a fireman. You're just there in case something comes up and you have to step in and help strategize or cool something down. And your role is to help with the transition, but also influence the clients to stay.
So, with regards to value, which is something that you mentioned, can you maybe explain how that ties into succession, and even more so, how a succession plan might tie back into building the value of your firm?
Yeah, it may be a little bit too complicated a subject to go very deep into. Um, but the things that a valuation company for our industry looks at, typically they start with the revenue side of things. So they're going to look to see, you'll hear the term recurring revenue a lot, but there's two types of recurring revenue and they get assigned a different impact into the creating the value. And one of those is fee-based or advisory business. It's by far the greatest thing outside of adding more assets and more revenue. It's the greatest value driver that you can create. And then the other recurring revenue, things like trails, annuities, mutual funds, those types of things, they also impact the value favorably over transactional business. But the levels that you have, the more fee based over the more annuities, is going to give you a much higher value. So as you're working, you not only want to work for, of course, the revenue that you're receiving at the time, but also if you can make changes or do things like bring on new clients and getting them into fee-based products, that's the best way to go because it's going to impact your value. If there's any clients that you have where it makes sense for the clients, obviously, then you want to move them to fee-based business and build that percentage up as high as you can. And then maybe one other point, having a significant number of households over age 70 can lower the value a little bit because I'm over 70, so I guess I get to say this. There's a shorter shelf life. I don't like to hear that. I don't like to say it either. But we're drawing down on comp, that we have savings, etc. So a buyer is going to look at that and say, I'm only going to have these clients for a period of time. So that can drive down the value. So the way to do that is make sure you get second gen in of those people, not only for the consistency of keeping the assets, but the primary thing is that having a younger age to put against that over 70 is going to lower your percentage. And so it almost artificially raises your value to some degree. So it's just the best way to go about it is to get a valuation from a fully accredited valuation company in our industry, learn what those value drivers are, and then just go about your year looking at it to say, what can I do here and there to gradually increase the value of my practice so it'll be worth more at the end.
Sure. And would you say having a succession plan in general, or specifically having a strong succession plan, ties into building a higher value for your firm potentially?
I think it helps you realize getting the value of your practice. So if you know who's going to buy it and what your practice, where it's sitting in terms of valuation and what things that maybe the new buyer would like, you can work on those things and you will get a higher price, depending on expectations. I will tell you from a buyer standpoint, you kind of like it that maybe a seller doesn't maximize their value, not just because of the price, but they want to have the uptick of going into a practice and improving it. So it's kind of a yin and a yang. But here for the seller, I think it's an opportunity to say, let's position myself for a very successful monetization of my equity.
Sure. And speaking of positioning and all of your experience with these transactions, as a seller who is probably retiring and is transitioning their business to a Gen 2, what do you think are some crucial ways that the seller can minimize risk in passing down their practice or selling their practice?
I think that if there's any way to get the buyer involved in the practice prior to the event, prior to the closing, now you've got somebody who's fully committed and has maybe a little bit of skin in the game, a little bit of ownership. And so really keeping that continuity partner or that succession partner focused, and ready to participate and eager to help build the practice is key. Now, if it's somebody outside the practice, it's just making sure you have a good relationship with them. And you probably, if they're outside the practice, you may not find that successor until you're closer to being ready to sell. Okay, that might be like a year out where you find that individual and you start those conversations. But you can still have in your mind the ideas of here's how I get my practice valued and they're in good shape and the market is good, and talk to the people that matter in your broker dealer or your RIA to make sure that you have the connections to be able to find somebody.
Now, on the other side of things, having done this for so long, can you maybe talk about some situations that unfortunately didn't go well, specific to client retention?
In my years of doing this, I've only seen two that fell below the threshold. And by threshold, I mean that typically if you retain at least 90% of whatever it is that you're measuring, assets, clients, or even revenue without market fluctuation, it's a success. There's always going to be some attrition, even clients passing away, unfortunately. So if you can do that, then that's a successful sale for both parties. I've only seen 2 situations where it's dipped below 90%. And quite honestly, that was because the buyers didn't do what we had talked about as far as the client messaging strategy. One went in there and talked with the client about themselves, not the client, but about the advisor. And I don't think that the client ever came up in the conversation, and did a great job of promoting his business. But then the client didn't hear from him again for like 10 months. And so exited. It's not a one and done type of a deal. It's a relationship building, multiple contact type of a process.
Totally.
The other one did something similar. We believe that, again, you honor the seller in the meetings, especially, and you don't change a lot. You don't jump into a lot of different things that the client's going to have to do. Well, this individual came in with their little program and said, well, what she's done for you is great, but here's what we're going to do. And we do things a lot differently. And the clients could not exit fast enough. Now,
Right.
cases, they still retained it in the 80s, it wasn't a huge loss, but the way the buyer mitigates that risk is the difference between, say, 85 and 95%. The sale price is reduced by 5%. So the seller mitigates some of the risk with retention, but the buyer also wants to work really hard to retain at least 90 so that they get their full payment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having more skin in the game on both sides.
Absolutely.
So finally, just to tee you up a little bit, would you mind explaining to both me and the audience what finish well is?
Yeah, finish well is a term that we trademarked because we really wanted to express how we do things differently in the marketplace. Our idea is that, this is a transaction, but again, the emotion part of it is very important. And so when we put together and help a client or, either a buyer or a seller, it's about working the entire package so that everybody feels, especially the seller, like they've finished well. It's not enough to just sell and walk away. It's got to blend and transition them into their new life.
We love it. And I know that you and your team is so crucial in making sure that happens for the people that you work with.
Thank you. It's the real reason that I'm not retired is because it's an awful lot of fun to help business owners sell and to help these younger business owners advance their business and grow. It's really a hoot. That's not a word most used.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your insights with our audience. Thank you to those who tuned in and submitted questions. We appreciate your continued viewership. Stay tuned for more from us here at Oak Street Funding with new content and new guests. Thanks again.